Not a good week to be president. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. All quiet at the White House tonight, though, at the end of what can only be described as another week of chaos. The president under fire from leaders around the world for quitting the Paris Climate Accord. His own staff refusing to say whether he still thinks climate change is a hoax. Meanwhile, there's Vladimir Putin's winking suggestion that patriotic Russians just might have hacked our election. And you ain't seen nothing yet. The big event next week, James Comey's Senate testimony. The White House so not looking forward to that. They're considering whether to muzzle the fired FBI director. A lot to discuss tonight, and here to help us, Dan Rather, host of Access TV's The Big Interview. Good evening, Mr. Rather. It's going to be huge next week with the FBI. The former FBI director, James Comey, testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was asked whether he felt the president pressured him to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn. He's going to be asked that. So, how do you think this showdown is going to go?
I think it's going to be one of the most explosive moments of the Trump presidency so far, and that's saying a whole lot. One cautionary note, it's possible that he'll be put back. This will be postponed. The White House is working, as you know, trying to claim executive privilege to stop him. And then also the special prosecutor, Mr. Mueller, his investigation is metastasizing so quickly, I can see a possibility that one of two things happens. He asks the former FBI director to delay his testimony or to truncate what he might otherwise be saying. So that's just something to look between now and next week. Do either of those two things happen? This
all can and probably will change by the time the day comes that he is to testify, you think. Do you think it's going to be better, since you mentioned the president asking for executive privilege, is it better to block him or just let him do it? Because if the optics of blocking him may be worse than him actually testifying.
Well, there's no good answer to that question for President Trump. Either way he goes, it's going to be trouble, big trouble. Look, it doesn't take anybody out of elementary school to realize that President Trump's presidency is, as the Southern sheriffs would say, in a heap of trouble. Today, these bombshell revelations just keep cascading. It's been, what, 24 hours at most since the president said, well, he isn't going to abide by the Paris Accords. But then today you had these developing stories. Special prosecutor is widening his investigation. The Russian banker close to Putin, who met with the president's son-in-law, tells one story about what the meeting was about. The son-in-law tells another story. One of these two people is not telling the truth. And so it just keeps going. You know, the difference between now and Watergate during the time of the mid-'70s with Richard Nixon, and we thought things were moving fast then. If we had one big bombshell development in a week or maybe 10 days, things were moving quickly. And that rolled out over a 2-year period. This is all rolling out in just a matter of days. Every day there's not one, but there are 2 or 3 new developments. Yeah. And that tells you inside the White House that no matter what the appearance on the outside looking in is, there's chaos inside. And there's also a big split, different people with different views of what the president could do, should do in order to get out of it. Let's talk a little bit about that because,
they're putting on a good face, or they're not talking about it. Sean Spicer just saying, you got to talk to the president's lawyer. But Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, who has interviewed the president a number of times, says she thinks the president is looking forward to the spectacle of it, the show of it, so to speak. What do you make of that?
Well,
and do you believe that?
This person has a lot of experience, so I listen carefully when that kind of talk comes out. I think on the one hand, because he is a showman, he's a great showman. He loves a spectacle, he loves a show, he loves a kind of television circus atmosphere. I can see why he would say, boy, that's great, Trump's name is up there. On the other side, what the former FBI director has to say cannot be good news for him.
Yeah. Maybe you ever wonder if he understands that maybe there is no collusion that he thinks of in the way that he thinks of collusion, right? But it's often the cover-up of or not being forthcoming with things.
At this level, at the presidential level, it's nearly always the cover-up. Yeah. And if President Trump gets in much deeper trouble, and that's an if. We don't have the facts, and one of the things we really need are the facts.
Facts, exactly.
But if it turns out that he didn't know or that there wasn't outright collusion, then everything pivots around that. But that's not the way to bet it, because when you have this many people doing this many things in secret and telling this many different stories, you've got to believe that there's been some law breaking.
And you don't know what you don't know other people's actions, you don't know what they said.
Well, exactly.
You can't be for sure.
No, you can't be
that.
for sure.
Yeah.
And you have on top of this business with the Paris Accords, the president pulling out, which, as I say, only happened hours ago, really, and it got kind of pushed back on the second page. But this is momentous.
Yeah.
This is.
Can we talk a little bit more about hacking? Because Vladimir Putin weighing in today on intelligence reports that say Russia meddled in the U.S. election. Listen to this.
A 3-year girl that is 3-year-old can perpetrate such an attack, and they present it like this. They can pass it off like this, and these specialists can invent anything, and then they will blame someone else. These are not proofs. These are trying to shirk responsibility.
So, I mean, just yesterday, Putin said that so-called patriotic hackers, remember, could have meddled in the election. And many people are saying this is the closest that he will ever come to admitting that there was some sort of interfering in U.S. elections. What's your reaction?
Well, I think that is a widespread belief. Second, I want to make clear this is not necessarily my opinion, but I'm convinced many Americans think that Vladimir Putin is about as trustworthy as a dog with a roast beef sandwich, and they're not going to believe anything he has to say. But, you know, if the special prosecutor is left alone to do his job for long enough, we'll eventually find out.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, we need to find out the facts right now.
Well, exactly, because you know, there's so many different stories being told. That's why I think that talk about obstruction of justice or perjury, somewhere in this mess, you have to believe there is some of that, because you've got too many people telling too many different stories. And that raises the question, well, what is it that the Trump administration has to hide? If he didn't have anything to hide, he'd be coming out and say, listen, I want all these people to come out publicly and talk about these meetings, and I want to tell you what I know about it. That's not what he's doing.
Yeah, and that's not what anyone at the White House is doing. Can we talk now? Let's talk climate change.
All
I
right,
want to talk about that in the Paris Accords. And this is something that you wrote. And this is, you know, of course, he visited Europe last week, and then he had the announcement yesterday. You wrote on Facebook that you think while President Trump cozies up to Vladimir Putin and Rodrigo Duterte, he is creating a void on the international stage with his America First policy. Explain that.
Well, I think it's very clear. First of all, when your only allies, the only people standing with you against the Paris Accords, are Syria and Nicaragua.
Nicaragua, who wanted more, actually.
Wanted more. They say that because they wanted more. And what President Trump is at risk of doing with himself as a person, with his presidency, and with our beloved United States of America, is appearing to be yesterday's man in yesterday's country, like some of those people who still like disco. I mean, they're stuck back in the 70s, or those men who wear beltless slacks or run around in neighbor jackets. It's yesterday's stuff. Now, the United States of America has always been seen as going forward, progressing, always moving forward. Now, under President Trump, and with this sole act, he sort of said to the world, you know what? We're yesterday's country, and I'm yesterday's man.
Yeah, I need to, because I'm wearing beltless slacks right now, and I'm just listening to disco on my run earlier
He spoke
today.
double stretch this week.
But they're not double knit, so I think I'm good. But I want to ask you about, here's something you wrote on this Facebook page, calling it a reckless and intemperate action. Why do you say that this is a blow to America standing on the world stage again?
Well, because so many
we set the example.
Because not only world opinion, American public opinion favors the Paris Accords. And I do think it was reckless, and that flows into a whole other conversation about what's going on in the White House with President Trump himself. That I think by pulling out of the Paris Accords, it was a matter of anger on his part. I think he's bewildered. I think he's enraged. And this happens to presidents when the kind of pressure gets on that Trump has, and you can argue no president has ever had that kind of pressure. But again, to use Richard Nixon, when things begin to press in on him, when he began to get the feeling, I'm angry, I'm outraged, I can't control things, Richard Nixon got mean as a Wolverine. And there's some of that in President Trump happening now. I think it's one of the reasons that he pulled out of the Paris Accords. He doesn't like what the leader of Germany says. He doesn't like what the leader of France says. He thinks these Europeans are all slightly elite, if not effete, and he's angry about it. And an angry, enraged, bewildered president running a chaotic White House is not just bad for his presidency, it's really bad for the country.
And bad for the world, in this case, pulling out.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure.
Always
good to see you, Mr. Rather. When we come back, did the Trump administration try to drop sanctions against Russia? And Vladimir Putin gets testy when pressed about hacking. We'll bring that to you next.